Guten Morgen.
Morgen.
Well, Professor Rudolf, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I think we can start. Professor Rudolf, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. We don't hear you.
We don't hear you, sorry.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll start again. So good morning, everybody attending this lecture in Europe, and good afternoon to Kazakhstan, of course. My name is Ulrich Rudolf. I teach Islamic studies at the University of Zurich. The primary area of my interest is intellectual history, especially the history of Islamic philosophy. Today, it is my honor and a great pleasure to welcome you all to the international online lecture on the contribution of Al-Farabi to the science and culture of Europe. I was informed that I should start with information about the organization. The lecture will be in English. The working language of the whole event is English, but it may be that in the discussion, some speakers from Kazakhstan, for some reasons, switch to Russian language. In that case, there will be an interpreter, and you will need to select English in the menu at the bottom of the screen so that everybody can follow the discussion in English if he wants. In any case, what we are going to do now is a kind of premiere. I think it's for the first time that scholars and students from Kazakhstan, Austria, Germany, Italy, and Switzerland are connected online in order to discuss a major figure in the history of Islamic philosophy. This is an unprecedented event which may serve as a model for further initiatives. On the other hand, it fits very well the general trend of this year to organize online lectures, online workshops, and even online conferences. As we all know, it's due to the corona pandemic affecting our life in many ways. But this is perhaps one of the few positive effects, one of the advantages of the crisis, because it opens new horizons and connects people who would usually not be connected that way. Today's lecture was organized by 3 institutions. The Embassy of Kazakhstan in Switzerland, who suggested it, the Al-Farabi Kazakh National University, who realized it, and the University of Zurich, who is in this case just the happy partner. Therefore, I first of all want to welcome the representatives of these 3 institutions. So it's in Bern, His Excellency, the Ambassador Alibek Bakayev. In Almaty, the Vice Rector of the Kazakh National University, Professor Mukhambetkhali Burgitbayev. The Dean of the Faculty of Philosophy and our today's speaker, Professor Aliya Masalimova. The Director of the Al-Farabi Center, Dr. Bershan Meyerbayev. And in Zurich, last but not least, the President of my own university, Professor Michael Skepman. The audience of this online lecture is, however, much wider. As mentioned before, it includes scholars and students from various countries. And I likewise want to welcome the distinguished colleagues who are connected to us now. In Austria, it's Professor Lohlke from Vienna. In Germany, Professor Adamson from Munich and Professor Baldau from Berlin. In Italy, Professor Cecilia Martini from Padua and Professor Fabio Grassi from Rome. In Switzerland, Professor von Kügelgen in Bern, Professor Peter Finke and Dr. Thomann in Zurich. In the name of all, I can say that we are very much looking forward to listening to this lecture and discussing about Al-Farabi. So, without further ado, I will finish this short introduction and pass on to Professor Burgitbayev from Almaty, who will make his welcome speech now. Please.
Little bit technical problem. Your Excellency, Ambassador of Kazakhstan to Switzerland, Mr. Alibek Bakayev, Your Excellency, President of the University of Zurich, Dr. Michael Chapman, dear Professor Ulrich Radolf, dear members of the academic community, ladies and gentlemen, dear students. Let me greet you on behalf of Al-Farabi Kazakh National University academic community today on this online international lecture on the contribution of Abu Nasr Al-Farabi to the science and the culture of Europe. We are very honored and proud to participate at such an important and interesting event. The outstanding thinker Al-Farabi has a special place in the history of world civilization. Born in the Kazakh land, the great scientist and the philosopher Al-Farabi left behind a great legacy. He is known as a second teacher after Aristotle. Celebration of the 1150th anniversary of Al-Farabi under the auspices of UNESCO is an important milestone in the modern history in the context of socio-political modernization of the modern society. It was a great honor for Al-Farabi Kazakh National University to act as a main organizer and a performer of anniversary events, both in Kazakhstan and abroad. In carrying out this important mission, KAZNU attracted academic circle to participate in the anniversary events and organized more than 60 international and republic conferences, roundtables, scientific webinars with the support of the United Nations and the UNESCO, organizations of Islamic cooperation, Turksoy, and the diplomatic missions. The events were organized by leading foreign universities, including Oxford, Istanbul, Sofia, Athens National University, University of Damascus, Delhi, and many others. The anniversary events were launched in India, Israel, Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia. And today we are glad to speak about Al-Farabi with Switzerland, Austria, Germany, and Italy. 3 previously unpublished treatises of Al-Farabi were translated from Arabic into Kazakh. For the first time in the world, the Al-Farabi encyclopedias that systematized all information about the great thinker was published. Guided by this and being the global hub of the United Nations Academic Impact Program on Sustainability, Kazakh National University has developed the Al-Farabi University Smart City project based on the ideas of Al-Farabi. It is aimed as symbiosis of 2 main components, technological and spiritual moral platforms. KAZNU developed and implemented its own model of new generation of University 4. The main goal is to demonstrate that the global mission of modern universities should not be limited to the training of qualified specialists. Much more important is the formation of world citizens with the high spiritual and moral values, able to contribute to the sustainable development, responsible for the fate of the whole mankind. In 2018, the University 4 model was presented at the United Nations headquarters in the New York and recommended for wide dissemination at the international level as a promising model of university development. A virtuous university should be the foundation of the virtuous society and a virtuous world. I confident that each university should become a smart university. In this regards, we are very grateful to the University of Zurich and the University of Vienna, Universities of Rome and Purdue for interest to the great legacy of Al-Farabi and gathering their students at this lecture. On the example of the fight against the coronavirus pandemic, we see how relevant the virtuous words is. I would like to recall the Farabi's appeal to all mankind. Only together, united, people can achieve happiness. Only through the association of many people who help each other, a person can attain the perfection to which he is intended by nature. In conclusion, I would like to express our readiness for the development of fruitful cooperation with your distinguished universities. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Burgitbayev, for your welcome speech. The next speaker is Professor Michael Scapman, President of the University of Zurich.
Thank you very much. His Excellency Ambassador Bakayev, Vice Rector Professor Burgitbayev, Dean Professor Masalimova, Director of the Al-Farabi Center Professor Meirbayev, representatives of the University of Bern, Vienna, Munich, Berlin, Rome, and Padua. Dear Professor Rudolph, dear Professor Finke, dear colleagues, dear students. It's my great pleasure welcoming you all of you here. I understand the language is English, but let me try to say the following. Selamet sisterme gourmeti erip tester. I hope you will not need a translation for that. As the president of the University of Zurich, I feel very honored to welcome all of you to this virtual lecture. I greatly appreciate to be part of this event, which builds a bridge between the academics of Kazakhstan and Switzerland and all the other nations participating. I would like to extend my thanks to the Kazakh ambassador to Switzerland, His Excellency Alibek Bayakev, for his initiative to promote this exchange. I was intrigued to learn that he's speaking fluent German, and I'm embarrassed I cannot be on par with him on his own language. International exchange is a critical element of excellence in research. This not only applies to modern times, as the example of Al-Farabi shows. I was fascinated to learn about the legacy of his early Islamic philosopher and scholar, whom the Kazakh National University is named after. By taking the words of ancient Greek philosophers as a basis for his own reflections, Al-Farabi's influential work perfectly reflects how academic exchange across cultural borders has always stimulated and advanced intellectual curiosity and creativity. With 28,000 students representing over 80 different countries, 7 faculties, and more than 150 study courses, the University of Zurich is Switzerland's largest and most diverse comprehensive university. The university itself is a fertile space at the crossroads of different ways of thinking and scholarly traditions. To uphold and continuously improve our position on a national and international level, we consider cooperation with other academic institutions a key factor. The University of Zurich is part of an extensive global network of partner institutions worldwide, with Asia and Central Asia being among our focal points. You may know that our Department of Social Anthropology and Cultural Studies puts a strong research focus on the regions of Central Asia, in particular on the social and cultural processes going on there. The department in general, and Professor Finke in particular, maintains a long-standing relation to Kazakh universities, with Al-Farabi University being indeed our most important partner in the region. In the last few years, a large spectrum of joint academic activities have been organized by members of the Al-Farabi University and the University Department of Social Anthropology, including workshops, joint research projects, the exchange of teaching staff, and student excursions. What makes these joint activities so valuable for members of the University of Zurich is that they provide opportunities to learn more about a part of the world that we have for many decades known very little about in the West. The region and cultures of Central Asia are also of great interest to our faculty and students. Our institutes bring together experts in language, literature, philosophies, politics, economics of different countries of Central Asia, significantly strengthening the focus of our university on Asian and Oriental studies. I'm therefore very pleased that Professor Ulrich Rudolph of the Institute of Asian and Oriental Studies accepted to moderate this event, which marks another major step in developing the ties between Zurich and Kazakhstan even further. I'm convinced that both Al-Farabi University and the University of Zurich will benefit from this exchange. It will provide new impulse for academic research in the fields of anthropology, Oriental studies, and even beyond. And now I'm very much looking forward to the contribution of Professor Masalimova and wish everyone attending this event an inspiring lecture with new insights and fruitful discussion. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Skabman. We have finally arrived at the center of our today's event, that is the lecture on Al-Farabi. The lecture will be given by Professor Aliya Masalimova, who is currently the Dean of the Philosophical Faculty of the Al-Farabi Kazakh National University. Professor Masalimova is an expert in philosophy and in cultural studies. In both fields, she has published extensively, touching on complex theoretical topics such as identity and identification in traditional culture, or marginality as a cultural problem, or on the history of Islamic philosophy, several articles on Farabi, his humanity, his ideas, his doctrine. All this confirms her broad interest in theoretical questions and in the history of philosophy. We are thus eager to listen to her lecture now, and Professor Masalimova, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Ulrich. Dear international online lecture participants, colleagues, and students, let me express my gratitude to the Embassy of Kazakhstan in Switzerland and colleagues from Zurich University for organizing this event and for the opportunity to speak to my colleagues and students from various European universities. This is a great honor and responsibility for me. Before proceeding to my lecture, let me briefly outline the main sections of my speech. Please, you can see it on the slide. Dear participants of the lecture, as you know, 2020 years was marked by the celebration of the 1150th anniversary of the great scientist and philosopher Abu Nasr Al-Farabi under the auspices of UNESCO. Abu Nasr Muhammad ibn Uzlak ibn Tarhan Al-Farabi at Turkey, the pride of Kazakh people, a native of the city of Otrar. In the Middle Ages, the city was a scientific and cultural center, located at the crossroads of trade routes connecting East and West. Also, 1150 years have passed since the Farabi's time. The descent of time could not stop the closeness of ideas. The values which the wise thinker put forward, morality, goodness, long-lasting happiness, perfection, education, are still relevant topics today. Due to its classic and universal characteristics, Al-Farabi's ideas are often compatible with the realities of the old times, and it responds to the spiritual needs of any age and the society in which it lives. The idea of a Otrar thinker creating a good civilization versus city, Al-Madina Al-Fadila, based on the ethical values such as the morality and justice, has been transformed through the centuries from the medieval era to modernity. If it will definitely be transformed into a combination of new and old ages in the establishment of consonance of generation. The phenomenon of Al-Farabi lies in the range of scientific and creativity interested of scientists, thinker, and was extremely wide. His scientific heritage is the rightfully of global significance. The list of his scientific works is more than 160 treatises. He makes a fundamental contribution to many areas of human knowledge, such as mathematics, philology, chemistry, biology, astronomy, philosophy, medicine, logic, sociology, political science, jurisprudence, ethics, and many others. His systematization and classification of sciences influenced for the subsequent development of world scientific thought. It was his interpretation and Arabic translation of the works of Aristotle, Plato, Euclid, Galen, Porphyry, and many others that allowed European Renaissance scholars to study the philosophical works of ancient Greek, authors which did not survive in original version, but became available due to the translations and commentaries of Al-Farabi, or Abu Nasr, as Abu Nasr Al-Farabi was called in Europe. Al-Farabi was called Muallim as-Sana, the wisest Greek teacher. He was the second teacher since the first was traditionally considered Aristotle, who lived 12 and a half century earlier. Historical epoch and cultural context. The Islamic roots in Al-Farabi's worldview have a special place. Al-Farabi is a representative of the medieval Islamic civilization. Tendencies of that time clearly reflected in the works of the thinker. The rationalist stance inherent in Al-Farabi's work reflects the advanced level of medieval Arab Muslim philosophy. Al-Farabi's emergence of philosophy and the religion as complementary, not mutually exclusive teachings, taking place among original views of him. Al-Farabi emphasized that philosophy is a tool of choice for the elite to understand the essence of nature, and it is the religion that is widely understood by the general public. With the spread of Islam, mosques were built and madrasas were established. The first educational institutions, the madrasas, were the first opportunity to knowledge. Madrasas in the Middle East and in Central Asia began to appear at the end of the 9th century and the beginning of the 10th century. According to manuscript, there is no evidence about existence of madrasas before. In the Middle Age, the madrasa was the only institution of higher education in the Islamic world, and the reason it was the only place that trains religious leaders. primary school teachers, and government officials. It is safe to say that the level of education of Otrar that Al-Farabi had initially obtained was high enough to allow him to continue in Baghdad, which has become the center of culture and civilization, as well as the science and education. The proof of this thought is Absatar Haji Derbisali, discoverer of the 30 Farabi named scholars from Otrar. Most of the world-renowned scholars of Otrar indicated that this place had its own school with rich tradition. To be qualified for further education, the center of the Caliphate, the knowledge of scholars who have received their first homeland educations level is more like in Baghdad. It is obvious that the Otrar on the Great Silk Road was the center of various cultures and civilizations. We can conclude from the myth that is in this medieval city, which promoted prosperity and had the well-known Otrar library, thought is not scientifically approvable. The question of Al-Farabi's attitude to his predecessors in philosophy and his assimilation of the ancient Greek heritage of Plato and Aristotle can be solved in this unity of interrelated aspect of the problem. As for the first aspect of the problem, the transfer of the ancient heritage took place in the condition of the subordination of the Islamic Empire to territories with a rich ancient culture, in which the center of ancient culture were preserved and through which the emerging culture of Islam became acquainted with them, absorbing the influence of the cultures of the peoples of Iran, Mesopotamia, Syria, Egypt. Being multi-ethnic, she mainly as Greek, Syrian, Persian source, the role of which was great. Theocentrism adopted by the Arab Muslim culture, to which the previous historical development of ancient philosophical thought also led, became the ideological core of Islamic philosophy. Unlike ancient Greek philosophy, medieval Arab-speaking peripatetic could no longer exist outside and independently of the Islamic faith. The value system and affirmed the theoretic organization of society and the obligatory religious ritual practice. Why do you refer the philosopher's legacy? Classification of the science. The philosophical principles of Al-Farabi are characterized to be rationalist. The great scholar was convinced that human beings are capable of defining with their intelligence purpose for things and all the actions happening in the universe. Al-Farabi does not chase beyond the imagination and miracle. His mind-based ideas are valuable with his pursuit of state of goodness on earth and according broaden of horizons of scientific knowledge. Moreover, the combination of the Islamic tradition, the elements of the Neoplatonic doctrine, the pre-Islamic beliefs, and the religious trends in the Greek philosophy. In universal philosophy gives a new way to the historical value of the works of Al-Farabi. By doing so, they have pushed the Europe thought schools to a new, higher level. Eventually, the Al-Farabi teachings has returned to his motherland from the two world civilizations, Southwest and the West. Also is returning in a new way, enriching the relationship and harmony between nature and creation, man and the society, humanity and the universe. Indeed, this heritage, which neither fits to a specific age nor belongs a place, it's fully entitled to the benefit of the country where the great scholar was born. Al-Farabi turned to Aristotle in the study of the material world. And in his social and ethical pursuits, he is guided Plato's teachings. If you consider Al-Farabi's philosophy as accumulation of Platonism, Aristotelianism, Neoplatonism and the synthesis of Islamism, in contrast to the aforementioned-isms, views which he disagrees with, and she additions made from the basis of Al-Farabi's outlook make his teachings unique. Al-Farabi is a scientist who systematized the medieval sciences. According to his classification of sciences, sciences reflect the harmony of man, nature, society. You can look at the screen. Commenting as the discoverer of a new way of understanding the world and a new alignment by the ancient heritage. This is how Abu Nasr al-Farabi understands his interpretation. The genius of Aristotle was fully revealed to him, and this was the genius of Al-Farabi himself. Hegel says about Aristotle that he was one of the richest and most profound scientific genius who have ever appeared on the arena of history, a man equal to whom no era has produced. Aristotle's mind penetrated into all sides and areas of the real universe and subordinated this scattered rich diversity. The interpretation of the common philosophical teachings of Plato and Aristotle in the treatise in the common views of the two philosophies, the divine Plato and Aristotle, showed the depth of metaphysical research, both Plato and Aristotle, their general attitude to the search for the ideal and the desire to translate it into real life. The scope of the philosophical heritage of the ancient world in Al-Farabi is so vast, but it is difficult to imagine how the human mind alone could contain an understanding of all the subtitles of the teaching, make a detailed analysis of the concepts, creating its own unique categorical apparatus for the revealing the main ideas. The presentation of the logic of the semantic content of the philosophy of the Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, which was carried out by Abu Nasr al-Farabi, has played and will play a role in the reassessment of the classical philosophical heritage for founding a new humanitarian ideology of the 21st century, ethical, dialogical, rational. And his teaching, which absorbed the scientific and philosophical heritage of the past and developed its own unique way of philosophizing, based on the priority of reason and morality, is a model for the improvement of the world and the man, which has no limit as long as a person, his mind and his heart are alive. Al-Farabi's philosophy of commenting is a strategy for the implementation of a dialogue of cultures, peoples, religions, and civilization, making a turn towards the new alignment into the context of a modernization process taking place in the world. His treatises have become the property of the treasury of the spiritual culture of mankind, with which every generation of people who turn to the history of world philosophy and science get acquainted in such his works. Grand book on music, civil policy, dialectics book categories, I don't list them, look at this slide, contain transnational ideas of freedom, equality, equality, moral duty, responsibility, justice, happiness, and critical thinking. It is these ideas that are the basis of any democratic just society that require the advancement in the world. Al-Farabi's treatise, The World on the Classification of Sciences, the study which in the medieval Islamic culture was considered mandatory for those who engaged in scientific research, is one of the first treatises of the Middle Age, in which the classification of sciences was carried out, the division of sciences into natural sciences and humanities, the necessary methodological approach and the principle of constructing scientific theories are confirmed. In this history of mankind was the greatest minds that have studied science, all the knowledge available to them, and created his own philosophical scientific system, which served as a source of new knowledge, a new enlightenment, a new understanding of perennial problems, and emerging on the cause of the development of civilization. Among them, Aristotle, Al-Farabi, Hegel, Marx. It is to the genius that humanity owes the elevation of the intellectual abilities, the moral priority of the aesthetic component, the desire for freedom and justice in every person. The systematization of Abu Nasr al-Farabi knowledge reconstructs the intellectual experience of mankind and constructs a new scientific and educational reality as the basis for the development of ideal societies. The classification on sciences by Al-Farabi later formed the basis for the classification of sciences by Al-Khwarizmi, the brothers of purity, Ibn Sina, and Ford, the largest representative of Eastern peripatetism, who continued the development of Al-Farabi's ideas, influenced the medieval Christian West, in the particular Roger Bacon and others. Musicologist Simon, logician and philosopher Raymond Lull relied on his work on the classification of sciences. With the name Raymond Lull, the development of the philosophical and mathematical discourse of combinatories begins in the European humanities, which Pascal, Leibniz, and Leibniz were in discourse on the combinator art were engaged in, and which plays an important role in modern mathematics, computer science, and other sciences. The starting point of the combinatory is mathematical legacy of Al-Farabi. Al-Farabi's classification on sciences formed the basis of the largest European medieval encyclopedia of Gandhi Salim. Famous mathematicians Al-Khwarizmi and Al-Batani lived and worked in the Baghdad Al-Farabi studied. Only in the Arabic translation have survived Heron's Mechanics and many treatises by Archimedes. Through the carriers of Islamic culture, many technical innovations entered European use. Some of them were adopted from China and India. Along with the translation activity and the creation of commentaries on the translated literature of the Islamic Middle Age, a scientific direction began to take shape, closely connected with the solution of applied problems and the practice of the construction, land surveying, metallurgy and trade, astronomy and mathematics, mineralogy, descriptive geography are developing intensively for foundations for the cultivation of experimental science are laid. Grand Book on Music. Al-Farabi's treatise on music served as the basis of the development of musical aesthetic theories in the Western Europe. For example, Roger Bacon, in his Opus 13, devoted to the theory of musical art, refers to the Al-Farabi and adheres to the same point of view regarding the division of music into several genders, as well as the Pythagorean doctrine of world music of the spheres. Bacon also included rhythms and melody in the musical structure. His theory of musical sound was created through a careful analysis of famous works devoted on the question of the origin of music. Therefore, pursuing the idea of synthesis of theory and practice in music, the scientists created a theoretical and practical concept of musical art, which became significant and recognized in the world of medieval musical culture and entered the treasure of the historical memory of world culture. With the development of musical theory in the context of the ancient tradition, Pythagorean, Platonic, Aristotelian, this systematization will be excluded from the structure of musical art. But in the 13th and 14th century, the Mosley tradition will begin to revive again the some music schools. It was the name of Abu Nasr Al-Farabi that a new era of musical art and the development of music in the Islamic world will begin. The phenomenon of Islamic music is related to the phenomenon of language. These questions were discussed by Abu Nasr Al-Farabi in Kitab al-Qurid and in the Grand Book on Music. He reveals the connection between non-verbal musical meaning and Arab verbal language meaning. Today, the newly revived art of comparative analysis of philosophical and the theological texts makes it possible to reveal the logical meanings of various musical theories. The famous field of comparative musicology, which was once created in Germany, played a huge role in understanding the music of the East and the West. Civil policy. The influence of Arabic ethical and political political writing is seen partly because Arabic philosophers were less productive in these fields, and partly because important works were not translated at all, such as Al-Farabi's Principles of the Citizen of the Perfect State, or as late as in the 16th century as Averroes' commentator on Plato's Republic. Nevertheless, Arabic philosophy, via their teaching on the intellect, exerted in the important influence of the border area between ethics and psychology, and on the discussion on human happiness in the particular. The virtuous city that comes from such good intention is a model state that gives all members of the society a happy time. During the creation of the city, the main principle of the philosophy were theoretical virtues and charity were the first preconditions that were inseparable from each other. Main direction for a virtuous city justly measure of all city structure relationships, as well as the distribution of equitable property among the members of the society, to be impartial in education of the population. Al-Farabi's justice must be the key to modern government. At the same time, a distinctive feature of governments is duty of the leaders of the upbringing of the general public, not just the governing them. In a various society, education is based on the same methods, if providing based on the same methods of pursuing and applying the foundation of philosophy and religions, as well as the continuity of the scenes and spiritually, respectively. Ultimately, this issue of happiness that forms the basis of Al-Farabi's heritage is an ancient dream of mankind. Happiness comes in a number of ways. However, the real difference of the philosopher's happiness is this pursuit of truth through scientific knowledge. True happiness is the ability of a person to get rid of the gluttony and the exhaustion of the materialism, to transform his spiritual world into the meaning of his life, and thus to rise to a level where the degree of development of civilization through its level of personal culture is formed. The highest goal is to be happy as a result of proper self-control. Al-Farabi puts human happiness first. Happiness is based on one's personal ethics and a policy of communicating with others, such as himself. Al-Madina, Al-Fadila, is an ideal, a perfect city, a virtuous society. To understand the virtuous city, we need to know the imperfections of all other cities. Only then will the city model of Al-Farabi can be found. Influence Al-Farabi in the philosophical discourse of modernity. Today, the study of the philosophical creativity of the Turkic thinker Abu Nasr al-Farabi has gained popularity and connection with a new wave of comprehension of topical issues of our time, both in the field of metaphysics and in the field of social reality. The 21st century has exposed a number of truly complex difficulties on the solution of which the material growth and spiritual development of all mankind directly depends. The appearance of global problems such as social, economic, political, ecological, scientific, and moral character directly indicate to a person his ambiguous and often contradictory attitude towards nature, society, and even himself. It has become clear for long that man has lost that in connection with the surrounding universes, which he has formed from time immemorial, human egoism, distrust between people, and as a result, consumer relations have replaced the sensitive attitude to the pure nature. At the same time, human cognition of nature began to gradually transform into a broad reflection of the surrounding reality, which in turn contributed to the formation of many metaphysical, social, philosophical, and ethical doctrines, one of which is the philosophical system of Al-Farabi. Al-Farabi's approach was methodologically fundamental in the creation of his philosophy. He used a wide research apparatus when constructing a system that was designed to describe and explain many aspects of reality, which is necessary not only in the field of ontological research, but is correctly applied in the field of the understanding interpersonal relations. The appeal to the scientific and philosophical doctrines allowed Al-Farabi, firstly, not to repeat in the interpretation of certain philosophical questions, and secondly, to introduce new ideas into the already existing problems of an ontological and social philosophical nature. For example, the interpretation of Aristotle, especially his metaphysical teachings, is a very difficult process. Many eminent thinkers recognized that Aristotle's metaphysics was beyond them. In this regard, Aristotle understood full responsibility for the large-scale systematization of metaphysical ideas, since all previous work in this area was basically too abstract and did not have a scientific nature of explanation. As a result, this led to well-known difficulties in reading Aristotelian metaphysics and further commentators on its content. It is a well-known fact that Ibn Sina, for a long time, tried to master Aristotle's metaphysics unsuccessfully. When reading Ibn Sina with a number of difficulties, such as worldview features of different eras and the difference in the applied logical apparatus, therefore, he needed a more universal methodological tool that would allow him to live the will of Aristotle's philosophical system. As a result, he found this tool is turned out to be the interpretation of Aristotelian metaphysics, carried out by Abu Nasr al-Farabi. Indeed, after reading Al-Farabi, Ibn Sina gained a new, deeper understanding of the Aristotelian treatise. Al-Farabi offered such a vision, thanks to which the Aristotelian work was presented in a more accessible manner. This example is indicative of the fact that Al-Farabi's methodological apparatus is very meaningful and relevant when applied in the interpretation of both obvious and complex ideological ideas. Therefore, the logic that Al-Farabi uses in his treatise is not only theoretical, but also contains an instrumental function. Al-Farabi developed a holistic teaching about the views of the inhabitants of the virtuous, ignorant, immoral, and lost cities. A virtuous society is impossible. He writes, if there is no relationship between its members based on moral categories. Those ethical foundations based on reason find an immediate response today. It is no coincidence that the Al-Farabi begins his typology of cities, which are opposite to a virtuous city, with an ignorant city, since ignorance implies a lack of knowledge and the use of reason in social practice. How relevant are his ideas in the modern work? The originality of Al-Farabi's approach was that he synthesized the classical ancient tradition in the person of Plato and Aristotle with the Neoplatonist idea of emanation, as a result of which an interesting metaphysical system appeared, very close in essence to how modern science interprets the very foundation of being. By this, we emphasize the scientific relevance of Al-Farabi metaphysics, which in many aspects is consistent with the fundamental view of modern scientists on the nature of things around them. Another trend in which the Turkic thinker worked hard is his interpretation of the first cause. All possible forms and interaction between the elements of the material object world arose here with the help of this deep ontological interpretation of the perfection of the first being, the identical state of being of the universe. We think which all possible forms of interaction between the elements of the material objects world arose. Unlike Plato and Aristotle, Al-Farabi does not reduce the origin to a kind of immovable prime mover. At the same time, unlike the Neoplatonists, he does not reduce the essence of the first being to identity with the universe itself. This once again underlines the universalism of Al-Farabi's views on such fundamental issues as the essence of God, the universe and their relationship. Therefore, many modern theologians and religious scholars rightly believe that Al-Farabi metaphysics can undoubtedly form the basis of the world's religious systems. And what can Al-Farabi teach us today? The next question of this study is the question of the self-development of modern mankind, which includes a correct understanding of ideas of the past and the ongoing continuity between generations of scientists, thinkers, intellectuals. The philosophy of Al-Farabi teaches us an objective view of the nature of the things studied. And the very example of Al-Farabi's scientific activity is a vivid example of constant service to science and truth. His weapon was reason, and his moral imperative was the command of his heart. Al-Farabi, by his example, showed us that the search for truth does not tolerate frivolous attitudes. Therefore, having taken up the most difficult issues of mankind, he was able to create a full-fledged ontological and social ethical concept, while simultaneously writing works in other scientific areas such as logic, linguistics, music, physiology. In conclusion, my speech, I want to note Al-Farabi formulate the idea of God as a prime mover. Thus Thus, he had a significant influence directly and indirectly on the works of Thomas Aquinas, Dante, and even Immanuel Kant, as well as on the medieval thinker Maimonides. Al-Farabi, second point, Al-Farabi is the classic of the medieval Western and Eastern eras, whose treatises were distributed all over the world. Stefan Friedrich Starr is the author of the book Lost Enlightenment. He writes that Al-Farabi's writing style, honored by sixth language, allowed him to express his boldest ideas logically and without emotion. Third point, he claimed that the highest virtue of humanity is reason, which he placed above the senses and imagination or intuition. God is omniscient, but people have the freedom to act or not to act, to think or not to think. The goal of the soul is to achieve its perfection and reason and disciplined thinking. In his definition of reason, human freedom and responsibility for one's own actions. Al-Farabi disagreed with what religious scholars of that time considered the main Muslim doctrines about the omnipotence of the Almighty. The first cause, duty, rulers of universe, but is the mind that determines human life. It is reason, not faith. This is it is the of human experience. Al-Farabi has contributed to many scientific fields: metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, physics, astrology, psychology, and music. Each direction represented topics for many subsequent studies from the 10th century to the present day. His main tool, the key to all the locks with which he opened the world of knowledge, with logic. For him and for his successor, Avicenna, logic provided a precious method of reasoning that could be applied equal to all sciences and the theology to reach the truth. Interest in the great thing of the East persists to this day throughout the world. His scientific works treatises cover various areas of modern science, from natural sciences to social political. Al-Farabi saw the purpose of science is serving man, in the fact that science should bring concrete practical benefits. At the same time, his worldview was differentiated by the fact that he saw the development of science in harmony with philosophy, morality, and religious norms. His ideal was the image of virtuous and comprehensively developed citizen. The university bearing the name of the great scientist sees its mission in the popularizing and promoting the ideas of the thinker, philosopher, scientist Abu Nasr al-Farabi. This is proved by the great work carried out by the university team to create the Al-Farabi Research Center, the opening of museum and scientific library, the publication of the scientist's work, scientific research within the framework of the projects, writing textbooks and teaching aids. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Masalimova, for this lecture. I think your presentation was extremely dense and inspiring. You raised many points, some of them on methods, methodology, some of them on doctrines, and others on the impact of Al-Farabi. And you mentioned that he was a scientist on the one hand and a political thinker on the other, and that concepts like justice and human freedom were important for him. I think there are many points which are interesting for our discussion, and I would like to ask my colleagues and the students who are attending the lecture about questions they have, maybe questions just for understanding what you told us, or questions for discussing the different points? Who would like to start the discussion?
Hello.
Hello.
Good evening or good afternoon, wherever are you. I do have a question I wrote on a chat session. Should I read it aloud or?
Yes, it would be nice if you read it to all of us.
I have an appreciation to Professor Masalimova, and I do have a question about what is the how much is the role of metaphysics of Al-Farabi in his political philosophy views, because as we know, he is not just a philosopher or translator of Greek heritage. He is also one of the greatest scholars of the Muslim world, Islamic world. So this is the question: what is the role of metaphysics, or especially theological metaphysics, in Al-Farabi's political philosophies? Thank you.
So thank you for your questions. If I clearly understand, we can know to know is about. We can ask about me or about the role of metaphysics, Al-Farabi's political philosophy. Political philosophy, yes, it's clear. I should say the metaphysics for Al-Farabi's metaphysics is by Al-Farabi's points view. The metaphysics is the universal scientist, and his difference from Aristotle. For example, Aristotle says about the metaphysics. Metaphysics as a first of philosophy, and but Al-Farabi's philosophy and metaphysics considered is equal, and he's marked the identity, the same science, and the society that Al-Farabi calls virtuous does not accept in any authority, and it's completely close understanding the and the for Al-Farabi the points he gives the person of he talk about the person the opportunity to act as he wishes by eliminating the human virtues, reduces the human to desire, and he always places man's metaphysical aim at the center. So if I was trying to explain my answer. So
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Masalimova. If I may serve as an interpreter, there are two questions already asked on the chat. The first one is, what is the distinction between philosophy and religion, according to Al-Farabi? Would you like to answer to this question?
Yes. Thank you for the interesting question. As we know, if we are comparing philosophy and religion, Farabi says the philosophy is universal, and religion change according to nation and society. And according to Al-Farabi, the true spiritual perfection depends on the equal depends of knowledge, both theoretically and practically. And Al-Farabi says that both philosophy and religion serve the happiness and well-being of mankind. The religion leads of man to the truth through the faith, but the philosophy forms the systems of thought based on the rational strength of that faith. Because if explained my point of view, the religion leads of man to the truth through faith, but philosophy forms system based on the rational strength. So.
Thank you. I continue with the second question asked by Nulikhan Alyanova. It's about his impact on today. So she asks, which of Al-Farabi's ideas had the greatest impact on today's science and society?
This question is, thank you very much for your questions, Nurulkhan, is my third part of my lecture devoted to these aspects, the impacts of Al-Farabi ideas today in society. And I think the is one of the few works of Al-Farabi, which they translated into Latin 200 years after the death of the author. And I think I think is the idea Al-Farabi's ideas for us give for us the theoretical and the practical for the two aspects, theoretical and the practicals. And I think his classification of sciences is has a huge role for the contemporary distinguish between the theoretical and applied science, and I think is Al-Farabi's idea about the virtuosity as and what kind of characteristic modernity man or there's a man has improved and dedicate and improve it, and I think is he's the role the Al-Farabi's life is the ideal, the model is as a model the how to scientists must so I will try my point, explain the I think is Al-Farabi's figures is phenomenon is the model is how the scientists should be the improve it itself, and the, how to be the sixth and is and the so so the how did the so I'm very nervous, sorry.
No.
Okay, I think is you know, for us is a very impacts the Al-Farabi's ideas about goodness, about the happy, it's how to be the happy, and how to scientists seeks and research and about his methodological and logic, and so I think his intellectual heritage for us is good the materials for the new researches and development of the new scientific school and trends. So.
Thank you, Anna. There's another comment and question out on the chat.
Okay.
This time by Emina Yezekeyeva. First of all, thank you for your report, which was fascinating. So that's the message. And the question is, what is the role of Al-Farabi in the formation of European Middle Ages and European Renaissance? Could you elaborate a bit on that?
Al-Farabi, we know with Al-Farabi managed the connects ancient and Islamic philosophy. And one of the available work on the influence of Al-Farabi of medieval Christian philosophy was written by English Orientalist Robert Hammond. In Al-Farabi, he noted the 3 points about Al-Farabi, about his place in the history of philosophy. Firstly, Al-Farabi became a kind of bridge through Muslim world and West world. And secondly, Al-Farabi had a great influence on the medieval scholastic thinkings, especially of the Maimonides. And thirdly, Al-Farabi improved many Aristotle's theories and supported the previously unsolved the problems. He was excellent logical and wrote commentaries and was able to explain it Aristotle organon. So.
Thank you. Currently, there's no further question in the chat. So I just ask all those who attend the lecture, is there any question you would like to ask?
Can I ask, please?
Yeah, please, go ahead.
Dr. Masalimova. My name is Aliya Abisheva. I am from Al-Farabi Kazakh National University. We know that Al-Farabi tried to synthesize science, religion, philosophy, metaphysics, and his metaphysics comes from the cosmology, and he tries maybe to synthesize some natural sciences and humanitarian questions, metaphysical questions, and he tried to get some perfect society by this way and the happiness for the mankind. So the question is, what methods Al-Farabi used for this, for his theory of the perfect society and the perfect man, maybe, and how he linked this happiness with the perfect social system.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions, my colleagues, Professor Aliya Abisheva. As you know, Al-Farabi's the methodology approach is the logics, in the rationalist. So in the first of all, the Al-Farabi's considered between the philosophy, religion, and metaphysics. He says about the logics is not the methodological approach, but as a function. So, and I think is how to the mankind include our itself. We should study the philosophy, and the philosophy as Al-Farabi. For Al-Farabi is philosophy is the science all about the essence. So, and what is the happiness is ultimate goal for the human beings, and happiness can be obtained only in the virtuous society, and virtuous society is can be built only based on knowledge. So, and this, and I think is if you, I will try to explain my answer. So.
Thank you. If I may just insert a question of mine, if I remember well, in the welcome speech, we were told that 3 treatises of Farabi have been translated into Kazakh languages. So my question would just be, in terms of information, which treatises have been translated into Kazakh language? And do you know
yes. This 3 treatises of Al-Farabi, it's Al-Wahid wal-Wahda, and Mawazi and Fusus al-Hikam. This in English is on Mawiza is so the English is so just a moment. That's about the unit. Units the teaching and the Fusus al-Hikam. Fusus al-Hikam
No, thank you. So I understand the first one.
Of the virtual.
It was Al-Wahid wal-Wahda, and it was Fusus al-Hikam.
Yeah.
And the second one you mentioned was
Al-Mawizi.
Okay.
Mawiza. Al-Mawiza.
Okay, thank you. What about further questions? Yeah, please.
First of all, I would like to say hello to everyone, and I'm really honored because here I'm graduated from Kazakh National University, and currently I'm also doing PhD at the University of Zurich. So it's kind of symbolical meeting for me. And also I would like to thank our Dean, Aliyama Salimova, for her lecture. I do have this kind of more simple question. Which work of Al-Farabi is your favorite, and what kind of principles introduced by Al-Farabi you use in your everyday life?
Thank you very much for your questions. I think Al-Farabi, for me, personally, is the ideal model of the scientist. My regard to Al-Farabi, I can express. For example, my son's name is Farabi. So, and for me is Al-Farabi is a great philosopher and thinker, and his relation to the Six of Truth, his ideas about the happiness and about the theories of the which kind of the people should be as good versus the citizens, about the I think is for nowadays is very important the be educated the people for as good citizens, as the activity citizens. So.
Thank you. If I may address directly Professor Rüdiger Lohlker from Vienna, I was told before our lesson that you had a question on music, Al-Farabi's theory of music.
There it is. Okay, quite, let's say it's much more a comment. Since we are working on the history of medical humanities in the Islamic world just now, and just running a research project on musical therapy. And that's where the grand book of music enters the theme. And so it's, do you think it's the theories on music by Al-Farabi do have an impact on the creation of the ideas on musical therapy, mental health, etc., in the Islamic world? Professor Masalimov.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, dear professor. It's a very interesting question. I want to say that I didn't, this problem is so deeply, but I will try to explain. Al-Farabi musical therapy, is it clear that music therapy plays a huge role in influencing a person's emotions and psychology. Al-Farabi had already acknowledged music therapy as a method of healing, as you know. And his views, the music has an effect on human emotion, human health, and music give impact on human health and sound and health due to sound and human nature. So, and the music is give some function in producing different emotions. So, and he says about the music, you should use as a musical therapy. So.
Thank you very much. It's a question we should discuss further later.
Thank you.
Thank you. We are a bit running out of time, but maybe there would be a time for one last question. Would anybody like to make some further comment or ask one last question?
I would like to ask something.
Yeah, Cecilia, please.
I would like to know if for your translation of Farabi Al-Wahid wal-Wahda, did you use Mahdi edition or there is a new edition of the text? Because we are working on a new edition and translation of this text in Padua. And so for me, to know. This is very interesting.
Dear the colleagues, unfortunately, I didn't participate this the translated this treatise, and this team works from Orientalist the faculty, and unfortunately I can't comment this question.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for the question. It's interesting to know that there's this project. So as we are running out of time a bit, I would like to make the last step because I was asked to give a kind of conclusion to this lecture. I must admit it's extremely difficult to make a conclusion because it was so rich and diverse and dense in the arguments. Nevertheless, I will try to raise some points. First thing which we learned, I think, was on methodology. Farabi's method is a rational method. It's based on logic. It's an advanced level of rationality, as you said. And it's a model, as you mentioned, in this being a scientific rational method. Second point, there's no contradiction to religion, because religion and philosophy works on different levels. And they are just several different ways to knowledge. So he is a philosopher, but he has nothing against religion. He integrates religion into his system. And third, on the methodological side, one way to knowledge is his interest in the past. So his open mind towards the intellectual heritage. And I think there's a key part in your paper, which you sent me before. I would like to read it just. I quote, "A closer look at Al-Farabi's works reveals his pursuit of knowledge, the heritage of the past, the purpose of gaining an extensive knowledge of the Indian and Greek philosophical heritage. The study of the philosophy of ancient civilization is not a backstep, but a revival of the past. Thought is formed as the only dimension of truth, and still his philosophy is different from the outlook of the ancient world and has its own signature." I think that's a key part of your lecture, that the heritage is not a backstep, but a revival and inspiring, that truth is based on rational knowledge, and that his philosophy is nevertheless not just an imitation of Greek philosophy, but has its own signature. So, next step, what is his philosophy about? What were the important doctrines you mentioned? One element was the classification of sciences, of course, his large treatise, Ihsa al-Ulum. Another one was on music, his synthesis of theory and practice in music. You mentioned quite shortly his treatise on intellect, which was extremely important for the history of philosophy. And you stressed very much his interest in politics, his political theory, his stress on good governance, on a perfect state and on a perfect ruler, on justice, and that the goal of all of this is happiness. And happiness seems, as I understand you correctly, more or less to be the central category of his philosophy. And you mentioned that it's happiness within the society, so there must be a good society in order to enable the members to be happy, but there's also the individual aspect of happiness. It is our individual seeking for truth, seeking for knowledge, and that corresponds on various ways. So a good society helps us to be a moral person, and thought, reflection helps us to actualize our morality and our faculties. Third step, his impact on the European Middle Ages. I think this is focused on the first 3 points you mentioned. classification of the sciences, of course. His Irsail Ulum, widely read in the European Middle Ages, commented upon a model for the classifications. Music, of course, we just talked about it, and the treatise on the intellect. I think one of the most important treatises in terms of impact on Europe. But no impact in the Middle Ages on politics. And this leads us to the last step. What can Al-Farabi teach us today? And you saw that in the questions there was some interest in this specific point. You mentioned the points in the end, but if you allow, I will stress again 3 of them. You said that we can learn from his rationality. I quote your paper. The philosophy of Al-Farabi teaches us an objective view of the nature of the things studied, and the very example of Al-Farabi's scientific activity is a vivid example of constant service to science and truth. So he's still a model as a scientist for you. Second important point for today, his universalist approach to religion. His including religion in his philosophical view, and to be honest, not just one religion, but several religions. In his system, there's place for Islam, there's place for Christianity, and also for other religions, because philosophy is the overwhelming structure of knowledge of mankind, but these religions are different expressions of the same knowledge, of the same truth. So there's a universalist perspective, and I think you would recommend people of today to work on this too. And finally, of course, as a model for today, his political thought. Because his political thought combines the analysis of social structures and reflection on ethics. Ethics as pursuit of happiness. And this, as I understand you correctly, is one of the most important things to learn for us today. Again, I quote your paper. Knowledge, according to Al-Farabi, means striving for what brings good and happiness. Having projected his ethical and political teaching on modern ethics, we can understand that one of these categories is civil society, which presupposes the principle of good and good to other people. In this understanding, the general line of the social and ethical system of Al-Farabi expresses the phenomenon of happiness that people acquire through a reasonable attitude to the surrounding reality. So he would be still an advisor for the society of today and for rulers of today, and his categories of rationality, justice, happiness for all people could still be a model for us. In a certain way, your lecture was very optimistic, in the sense that we can benefit from his thought and that we can apply his thought still today. And as this optimistic tone is I think, an interesting message of the whole lecture, I would like to conclude my comment with a quotation which I take from the text you sent me. I quote, "The presentation of the logic of the semantic content of philosophy of Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, which was carried out by Al-Farabi, has played and will play a role in the reassessment of the classical philosophical heritage for founding a new humanitarian ideology of the 21st century. Founding a new humanitarian ideology of the 21st century. Ethical, dialogical, rational. And his teaching, which absorbed the scientific and philosophical heritage of the past and developed its own unique way of philosophizing based on the priority of reason and morality, his teaching is a model for the improvement of the world and the improvement of man, which has no limit as long as a person, his mind and his heart are alive." I mean, this is a wonderful message. As I said, it's extremely optimistic, and it's one of the reasons that we can say studying the past of philosophy is not just an academic thing, but is an inspiration for today. And in that sense, I would really thank you extremely for this lecture, for the discussion, for the questions and the answers you gave. I thank the organizers, University of Almaty, for this wonderful moment this morning. I again thank the Kazakh ambassador in Bern who suggested to organize this lecture to all of us. And I would like to ask all participants now to unlock their microphone and to make an applause as a final moment of this lecture. Please, go ahead.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much, Mr. Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bitte, Luaga.
Allez.